The rescued beings filled HFY's station until there was barely room to breathe. 43 Lumineth had been freed from Nexus 7, along with 72 other captives from a dozen different species. They wandered the corridors in dazed groups, struggling to remember what freedom felt like after years of being nothing but resources to be harvested. Ciora moved among them with a patience that surprised everyone. Including herself, she held the hands of those who could not stop, shaking and spoke softly to those who had forgotten how to use their own voices. The younger Lumineth looked at her with awe because she was the one who had reached through the darkness and pulled them back to life. "You have become a leader," Taiho observed as he watched her comfort an elderly Lumineth who had been trapped for over 30 years. "I have become what I needed to be," Ciora replied. Someone had to show them that survival was possible. The Galactic Council had taken notice of what happened at Nexus 7. Reports of the attack spread across every news network, carried by witnesses who had seen the small human fleet tear through Syndicate defenses. The Council sent investigators to document the conditions in the harvesting facility, and what they found shocked even the most cynical. Politicians, living beings used as batteries, their rights stripped away, and their existence reduced to energy production. The evidence was impossible to ignore and impossible to excuse within days. Arrest warrants were issued for Overseer Drin and 17 other Syndicate commanders. Their assets were frozen and their operations declared illegal under 12 different treaties. It was not enough to destroy the Syndicate entirely, but it was a beginning. Taiho watched the news coverage from the station's small common room. His shoulders still aching from wounds that were healing. Slowly, Park Jisoo sat beside him, her expression thoughtful as a council representative discussed the implications of the rescue. "They're calling you a hero," she said. "The human who started a revolution against the slave trade." "I just cut one girl free from a machine," Taiho replied. "Everything else came after. That is how revolutions start." Jisoo pointed out, "Someone decides that one person is worth saving, and then they discover that one person is connected to another and another, until suddenly you are changing the galaxy." She was not wrong. Taiho had never intended to lead anything, but somehow he had become the center of something larger than himself. Humans from across the sector were reaching out, offering ships and supplies and their own hands to continue the work he had started. Other species were joining too. Beings who had lost family to Syndicate operations and wanted to help prevent others from suffering the same fate. A coalition was forming, unofficial and chaotic but determined. They called themselves the Free Light Alliance, a name that Ciora had suggested during a planning meeting. Their goal was simple: find every being held in illegal harvesting operations and set them free. The Lumineth were at the heart of the alliance because their unique abilities made them invaluable for locating hidden facilities. Ciora had discovered that she could sense her people across vast distances, feeling their energy signatures like faint stars against the darkness of space. Together with the other freed Lumineth, she created a network that mapped Syndicate operations with unprecedented accuracy. "There are still hundreds of us out there," she told Taiho one evening as they stood together in the station's observation deck. "Some have been trapped so long, they have forgotten their own names. We will find them," Taiho promised. "However long it takes." Ciora turned to look at him, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "You could have walked away at any point," she said. "When you found me on that ship, you could have left me there, and no one would have blamed you. I would have blamed me." Taiho answered, "That is the only judgment that matters." "Why do humans think like that?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Every other species I've encountered calculates risk and reward before acting, but humans seem to ignore those calculations entirely when someone is in danger." Taiho considered the question carefully Before answering, I think it is because we know what it feels like to be helpless. He said finally, human history is full of moments when people needed help and no one came. And we carry those memories in our bones. He looked out at the stars. Countless points of light representing worlds he would never see. So when we have the chance to be the ones who come, we take it, even when it costs you everything. Especially then, Taiho confirmed, because the cost of not helping is worse than any price we might pay. Siora was quiet for a long moment. My people used to believe that the universe was cold and uncaring. She finally said that the only law was power and the only truth was survival of the strongest. She reached out and took his hand, her skin warm with inner light. You have shown me a different truth. The trial of Overseer Drin was broadcast across the galaxy. A public accounting of crimes that had been hidden for decades. Witnesses testified about conditions in harvesting facilities, about the systematic brutality of syndicate operations, about children taken from their families and used until they died. Drin showed no remorse throughout the proceedings, maintaining that he had simply been conducting business according to market demands. The verdict was guilty on all charges, and the sentence was life imprisonment on a penal colony far from any world he had ever exploited. It was justice. Imperfect and incomplete, but real. In the months that followed, the Free Light Alliance grew from a handful of ships to a fleet of over 200 vessels. They conducted raids on syndicate facilities across 3 sectors, freeing thousands of captives and bringing down criminal networks that had operated with impunity for generations. The Lumineth, who had been rescued, became some of the most effective members of the Alliance, using their abilities to locate hidden facilities and protect rescue teams during operations. Siora led many of these missions herself, transforming from a victim into a warrior with a cause. She never forgot what it felt like to be helpless, and she channeled that memory into determination. That nothing could break Taiho remained at her side through all of it. The human who had started everything by making one simple choice. Other humans joined them until the alliance was a true partnership between species, each bringing their own strengths to the common goal. The galaxy began to change, not quickly and not completely. But the change was real, and it was spreading on the anniversary of her rescue. Siora stood before an assembly of over 5,000 beings who had been freed from exploitation. Lumineth and non-Lumineth alike filled the great hall of a station that had become the Alliance's headquarters. Their faces turned toward the small girl who had become something much larger 1 year ago. I was a battery, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. I was a thing to be used, a resource to be drained, a number on a ledger with no name and no future. She paused, looking out at the crowd. 1 year ago, a human found me in the darkness and made a choice that changed everything. Taiho stood at the edge of the stage, uncomfortable with the attention, but unwilling to leave. Siora gestured for him to join her, and he did. Standing beside the girl he had saved, who had become a leader, humans taught me that survival is not enough. Siora continued, that being alive means nothing if you are not also free. She took Taiho's hand and raised it high. They taught me that the measure of a species is not their technology or their strength, but their willingness to fight for those who cannot fight alone. The hall erupted in cheers that shook the walls. Beings of every species stamped and shouted and celebrated the unlikely partnership that had given them hope. Later, when the celebration had quieted and the crowds had dispersed, Siora and Taiho stood together in the observation deck, where they had spent so many hours planning and hoping and preparing. What do we do now? Siora asked. We keep going. Taiho answered, there are still people out there who need help, and we are not done until all of them are free. Siora smiled, an expression that still felt new and wonderful on her face. No one left behind. She said, no one left behind. He agreed. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and full of possibility. Somewhere in that vastness, there were still beings waiting for rescue. Still victims hoping for the help that might never come, but it would come. Because a human had made a choice, and if Lumineth had found her strength, and together, they had proven something the galaxy had forgotten. That the darkness was never absolute. That there was always light for those willing to fight for it, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change everything. The galaxy had always seen humans as latecomers to the cosmic stage, primitive and unremarkable compared to species with millennia of advancement. But Siora knew the truth now. Humans were not defined by their technology or their power. They were defined by a simple promise that they kept no matter the cost. No one left behind, not ever. 3 weeks passed since the battle at Havoc Station, and the galaxy had begun to take notice of the human who defied the Keth Syndicate. Taiho's broadcast on the open channel had reached farther than he ever expected. Ships arrived at the station one by one, crewed by humans who had heard his call and decided that some things were worth fighting for. They were not soldiers or warriors by any official measure. There was a freighter captain named Park Jisoo who had lost her brother to syndicate trafficking 10 years ago and had been waiting for a chance at justice ever since. There was a mechanic named Brennan who had served with Taiho in the military and still believed in the oath they had both taken. There was a retired pilot named Chun who was 70 years old and claimed she had one good fight left in her before she died. 12 humans in total answered the call, each bringing their own ship and their own reasons for being there. Siora watched them gather with wonder she could not hide. "They came because you asked," she said to Taiho as they observed the small fleet taking shape outside the station. "They came because it was right." Taiho corrected, "I just gave them a direction." Havoc had been working without rest since the battle, analyzing the data they had recovered from syndicate communications and mapping out the locations of their harvesting facilities. The largest was a station called Nexus 7, hidden in a nebula at the edge of charted space. According to intercepted transmissions, it held over 40 Lumineth, along with dozens of other beings from species the Syndicate found useful. "This is suicide," Havoc announced when he presented his findings to the assembled crew. "Nexus 7 is defended by a fleet 3 times our size, and their security systems are designed specifically to prevent rescue attempts. Then we find a way around those defenses." Taiho said, "There is always a way." Siora stepped forward, her presence commanding attention in a way she had never possessed before her awakening. "I can feel them," she said quietly. "My people in that station, their energy calling out like candles in the darkness." She placed her hand over her heart. "If I can get close enough, I can connect with them and help them break free from the machines that hold them. That would require getting you inside the station," Park Jisoo pointed out, "which means getting past the fleet." "We create a diversion," Brand suggested. "Hit them somewhere else to draw their forces away." The planning session lasted for hours as they argued and debated and refined their approach. Taiho listened to each voice and incorporated their ideas into a strategy that was reckless and desperate. And just might work. They would attack a syndicate supply depot first, forcing Nexus 7 to send reinforcements while the fleet was weakened. A small team would infiltrate the station through maintenance tunnels that Avik had identified in stolen schematics. Siora and Taiho would lead the infiltration while the rest of the fleet engaged whatever forces remained. "If this fails, we all die," Chun observed matter-of-factly. "Then we better not fail." Taiho replied. They launched 3 days later, their ragtag fleet jumping through hyperspace toward the supply depot like a thrown fist. The attack was brutal and efficient. 12 ships hitting a target that expected no resistance and crumbling under the surprise assault. Syndicate distress signals went out immediately, and within hours, half the fleet guarding Nexus 7 had departed to respond. Taiho guided his salvage ship through the nebulous swirling gases. Using the electromagnetic interference to mask their approach, Siora sat beside him in the cockpit, her eyes closed and her body glowing softly as she reached out with senses humans could not understand. "They know we are coming," she murmured. "The Lumineth in the station can feel me approaching and their hope is waking them up. Can the Syndicate detect that? I do not know," she admitted. "I have never done this before." They docked at an abandoned maintenance port on the station's lower levels and slipped inside through a hatch that Havoc had promised would be unguarded. The interior of Nexus 7 was a maze of corridors and processing facilities that hummed with stolen energy. Siora led the way, following the pole of her people like a compass pointing toward true north. They encountered their first guards at a security checkpoint. Two Syndicate soldiers who never saw them coming. Taiho handled them silently, his military training returning like muscle memory as he disabled them without killing. "Why did you spare them?" Siora asked as they moved past the unconscious bodies. "Because killing should always be the last option," Taiho answered, "even when they would not show us the same mercy." She considered this as they descended deeper into the station. "Humans are very strange." She finally said, "You would spare your enemies, but die for strangers. We can tame multitudes." Taiho replied with a slight smile. "That is what makes us interesting." The harvesting chamber was worse than anything Taiho had imagined in his darkest nightmares. Row after row of beings hung suspended in machines that drained their life force, their bodies wasted and their eyes empty. The Lumineth glowed faintly among them, their light dimmed to barely visible flickers by years of extraction. Other species were there too. Tall insectoid beings with wings that had been clipped. Small furry creatures whose thermal energy was being harvested. Beings Taiho could not even identify who had been reduced to biological components. Siora fell to her knees at the sight, a sound escaping her that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. "I did not know," she whispered. "I thought it was only us. Now we save all of them," Taiho said, helping her back to her feet. "Starting now." Siora closed her eyes and reached out with her power, connecting to the other Lumineth through bonds of shared energy and shared suffering. She felt their pain and their despair and their tiny sparks of hope that had somehow survived years of torment. "Wake up," she called to them through that connection. "I am here, and I am going to set you free." The response was overwhelming as 40 Lumineth minds touched hers at once, their combined consciousness flooding her with memories and emotions that nearly knocked her unconscious. But underneath the pain, she felt their power, dormant and suppressed, but still burning like embers waiting for fuel. "Together," she told them. "We do this together." Alarms began to shriek throughout the station as the Lumineth started to glow brighter. Taiho grabbed a console and began working to disable the extraction systems, using codes that Havoc had provided in brute force. When the codes failed, Syndicate soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons raised and orders to protect the assets at all costs. Taiho turned to face them with nothing but his plasma pistol and his determination. "You should not have come here." "Human," the lead soldier said. "This is Syndicate property, and you are trespassing. These are people." Taiho replied, "And they are coming with me." The Lumineth awakened. Light erupted throughout the chamber as 40 beings released power they had been forced to suppress for years. The extraction machines overloaded and exploded in showers of sparks. The restraints holding the captives snapped like dry twigs. The Syndicate soldiers collapsed as waves of bioelectric energy swept through the room. Siora stood at the center of it all, her arms raised and her body blazing like a star as she channeled the combined power of her people. She reached out to the other captives as well, the non-Lumineth who could not free themselves, and burned away their restraints with precision that should have been impossible. "Run," she commanded, her voice echoing with harmonic resonance that needed no translation. Run and do not stop until you reach the ships. The freed captives fled toward the docking bays, where Taiho's fleet waited to receive them. Syndicate forces tried to stop them, but the Lumineth created barriers of pure energy that no weapon could penetrate. Taiho fought alongside them, covering their retreat, while Siora maintained the protective field. They were going to make it. Then Overseer Drin appeared at the main entrance with a weapon Taiho had never seen before. A device that pulsed with dark energy that seemed to drink the light from the air around it. Energy dampener, Drin announced with a cold smile. Designed specifically to neutralize Lumineth power. He fired and the field collapsed. Siora screamed as the dampening wave hit her, forcing her to her knees as her glow flickered and died. The other Lumineth fell too. Their combined power snuffed out like candles in a hurricane. Did you really think we had not prepared for this? Drin asked, advancing with soldiers at his back. We've been harvesting your kind for generations, and we know exactly how to control you. Taiho stepped between Siora and the approaching syndicate forces, his pistol raised in a hand that did not tremble. You will have to go through me, he said. Gladly, Drin replied. He raised the dampener to fire again, but this time Taiho was ready. He had noticed the device's power coupling during the first shot, a vulnerable point that glowed red with heat buildup. His shot was perfect, striking the coupling and causing the dampener to explode in Drin's hands. The Overseer staggered back, his face burned and his weapon destroyed without the dampening field. The Lumineth power surged back like a tide returning to shore. Siora rose to her feet, her eyes blazing with fury and determination. You called us property, she said to Drin. You called us assets and resources and things to be used. She raised her hand and light gathered around her like a halo. We are none of those things. The energy pulse that followed was the brightest thing Taiho had ever seen. The Syndicate had found them through an informant network that stretched across the fringe sectors like a web of poison. 3 warships hung in space around Havoc's station, their weapons trained on every possible escape route. Taiho's hands tightened on the flight controls as warnings screamed across his display. They knew we were coming, Siora said quietly from behind him, her voice carrying the resigned tone of someone who had expected betrayal. Havoc did not sell us out, Taiho replied with certainty. Someone in his network did, but not him. A transmission came through on the emergency channel, the voice cold and precise in the way that only professional killers could manage. Salvage your vessel. This is Overseer Drin of the Keth Syndicate, the voice announced. You have stolen property that belongs to us, and we are here to reclaim it. Taiho opened a return channel. The only thing I have on this ship is a passenger, and last I checked, the galaxy outlawed slavery centuries ago. The Lumineth is not a slave. Drin responded smoothly. She is an energy asset legally purchased from her colony survivors, and you have interfered with a legitimate business operation. Then, take me to court. Taiho said, until then, get out of my way. He pushed the throttle forward and aimed directly at a gap between 2 of the warship's plasma fire erupted around him, but the Syndicate ships were careful not to hit him directly because they wanted their property undamaged. Taiho used that hesitation to his advantage, weaving through their formation while Havoc opened the station's emergency bay doors. They shot through the opening with meters to spare, and the doors slammed shut behind them. Counselor Havoc was waiting in the bay, his tall Rethany frame hunched with age, but his 4 eyes still sharp with intelligence. He took one look at Siora, and his expression shifted from concern to barely controlled fury. They turned her into a generator, he said, his voice thick with disgust. I have seen this before, but never this extensive. Can you help her? Taiho asked as he helped Siora down from the ship. I can try, Havoc answered, but I need time, and those ships outside are not going to give us much. The station shook as the first barrage hit the external shields. Overseer Drin's voice echoed through the communication system. broadcast on all frequencies so that everyone aboard could hear. You have 1 hour to surrender the Lumineth, he declared. After that, we will cut through this station piece by piece until we find her. Havoc led them through narrow corridors to his medical facility, a clean space filled with equipment that looked both ancient and incredibly advanced. Ciora climbed onto the operating table without being asked, her body already remembering the position from countless procedures performed without her consent. This will be different, Havoc assured her. Noticing her tension, I am going to remove the harvesting technology from your body. Not add more. Will it hurt? She asked. Yes, he admitted honestly, but you will be free when it is over. Ciora nodded and closed her eyes. Taiho watched the doctor begin his work, carefully disconnecting the parasitic systems that had been fused to her nervous system. Each removal made Ciora flinch, and once she screamed so loudly that Taiho had to leave the room because he could not bear to hear it. He found himself in the station's small command center, watching the syndicate ships circle like predators waiting for weakness. The hour was running out, and they had no weapons capable of fighting back against warships. An old communicator sat on the console. Dusty from disuse, Taiho stared at it for a long moment before picking it up and broadcasting on an open channel that would reach anyone within range. This is Yoon Taiho, formerly Sergeant Yoon of the Earth Defense Forces, he announced. I am currently sheltering a victim of syndicate trafficking at these coordinates, and we are under attack. He paused, knowing how foolish his next words would sound. If there are any humans in range who believe that some things are worth fighting for, now would be a good time to prove it. He did not expect a response, and he did not receive one, but he had learned long ago that hope was not about expectations. The hour ended and the syndicate began their assault. Explosions rocked the station as their weapons tore through the outer hall. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut to contain the breaches, but Havoc's clinic was located near the center, and they had minutes at best before the attackers reached them. Taiho grabbed a plasma rifle from the station's small armory and positioned himself at the main corridor leading to the Veer medical bay. He had no illusions about his chances against trained syndicate soldiers, but he also had no intention of making it easy for them. The first wave came through in tactical formation. 6 soldiers in black armor, moving with professional precision. Taiho dropped 2 of them before they even realized he was there. Using the corner of the corridor as cover, while returning fire, the others fell back and called for reinforcements. You are only delaying the inevitable. Drying's voice came through the station speakers. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick. I have a counteroffer, Taiho shouted back. Leave now, and I will let you live. Drin actually laughed at that, a cold sound without humor. I admire your courage. Human, he said. It is a shame you wasted it on something so worthless. The second wave was larger. A dozen soldiers pushing forward. Through sheer numbers, Taiho fought them corridor by corridor. Using every trick his military training had taught him, he set traps with emergency systems and created choke points with debris and made them pay for every meter they advanced. But there were too many of them, and he was only one man. A plasma bolt caught him in the shoulder, and he went down hard, the rifle clattering from his grip. Syndicate soldiers surrounded him within seconds, their weapons aimed at his head. Overseer Dren walked through their ranks, a tall Velthari with pale scales and eyes like chips of ice. He looked down at Taiho with contempt mixed with grudging respect. You killed 11 of my soldiers, Dren observed. For what? For her, Taiho answered through gritted teeth. For the girl you turned into a battery. She's not a girl, Dren corrected. She is an energy source. Nothing more and nothing less. He gestured to his soldiers. Bring me the Lumineth and execute this one publicly so that others learn what happens when humans interfere with Syndicate business. The soldiers dragged Taiho toward the command center while others moved toward the medical bay. He struggled against them, but his wounded shoulder made resistance impossible. They threw him to his knees in front of a camera that would broadcast his execution across the sector. Any last words? Drin asked, raising his weapon before Taiho could answer. Every light in the station flickered and died. Then came the light. It poured through the corridors like liquid sunrise. A brilliant blue-white radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Syndicate soldiers screamed and collapsed as the energy surge overloaded their armor and weapons. Only Taiho was spared, the light flowing around him like water around a stone. Ciora stood in the doorway of the medical bay, her body blazing with power she had never been allowed to use. The ports and cables were gone, removed by Havoc's surgery. And without the machines to drain her, she had finally become what the Lumineth were always meant to be. You wanted my energy, she said to Drin, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the walls vibrate. Here it is. She raised her hand and Drin flew backward as if struck by an invisible wave. His weapon melted in his grip, and his soldiers fled in terror from the small girl who had become something they could not fight. Ciora, Taiho called out weakly. It is okay. She turned to him and the light dimmed slightly, enough for him to see her face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, glowing like liquid stars. You came back for me, she whispered. No one ever came back for me. Always. Taiho promised, I will always come back. The remaining Syndicate forces retreated to their ships. Dragging their wounded overseer with them, Havoc emerged from his clinic, staring at Ciora with awe and something that might have been hope. I have never seen a Lumineth at full power, he breathed. They said it was impossible. They were wrong, Ciora said simply. She helped Taiho to his feet and supported him as Havoc treated his wound. The Syndicate ships withdrew, unwilling to face whatever she had become, but they all knew this was not over. Drin would return with more forces and more weapons, and the Syndicate would never stop hunting a Lumineth who had learned to fight back. What do we do now? Havoc asked. Ciora looked at Taiho, her eyes still glowing faintly with inner light. There are others like me, she said. Dozens of my people still trapped in Syndicate facilities across the sector. She took his hand in hers. Will you help me free them? Taiho smiled despite the pain in his shoulder. I told you, he said. No one left behind. The asteroid belt was a graveyard of spinning rock and ancient debris that had killed better pilots than the Syndicate employed. Taiho flew through it like a man possessed, threading his ship through gaps that should have been impossible and using the tumbling stones as cover from enemy fire. Plasma bolts streaked past his cockpit, close enough to illuminate the interior with brief flashes of deadly green light. The Syndicate ships were faster and better armed, but they were also cautious in a way that Taiho could not afford to be. He pushed his engines beyond their safety limits and felt the entire ship vibrate with protest. One of the pursuing vessels clipped an asteroid and spun away, trailing fire and debris. The other two pulled back slightly, unwilling to risk the same fate. Taiho seized the opportunity and dove toward a massive rock formation that his sensors said contained heavy metals, thick enough to block their scans. He cut his engines and let the ship drift into the shadow of the asteroid, going dark and silent as the Syndicate vessels searched for him in the cargo bay. Ciora had managed to pull herself upright on the medical cot. Her body ached in ways she had forgotten were possible, every nerve ending screaming from the sudden absence of the machines that had regulated her existence for so long. The ports in her arms and spine where the cables had connected still leaked a thin fluid that glowed faintly in the dim light. She wrapped her thin arms around herself and tried to stop shaking. The human appeared in the doorway, his face flushed and his breathing heavy from the stress of their escape. He looked at her with eyes that held no cruelty and no calculation, only concern that seemed entirely genuine. Siora did not know how to process kindness anymore because kindness had been beaten out of her years ago. "We lost them for now," he said, moving toward her slowly as if approaching a frightened animal. "My name is Taiho, and I'm going to help you if you will let me." "Why did you take me?" Siora asked, her voice rough from years of disuse. "I am worth nothing without the machines to harvest my energy." Taiho knelt beside the cot so that he was looking up at her instead of down. "You are worth everything because you are a person, not a power source," he said simply. "What they did to you was wrong, and I could not leave you there." Siora stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie she was certain must be hiding there. She found nothing but tired sincerity and a stubborn determination that made no logical sense. "Humans are strange," she finally said. "I have heard stories about your species, but I thought they were exaggerations." "What kind of stories?" "That you form attachments to beings you have never met," Siora answered. "That you will risk everything for strangers and call it honor instead of foolishness." Taiho smiled slightly at that description. "We have a saying on Earth," he told her. "No one left behind." He opened a medical kit and began treating her wounds with gentle hands that had clearly done this work before. Siora watched him clean the ports in her skin and apply bandages that would help them heal. No one had ever tried to heal her before because the syndicate only cared about keeping her alive enough to drain. "You were a soldier," she said, recognizing the efficiency of his movements. "I was." Taiho confirmed. "Earth military forces for 12 years before I decided I could not stomach it anymore." "Why did you leave?" He was quiet for a moment, his hands pausing in their work. "Because I was ordered to do something I believed was wrong, and I refused," he said. "They gave me a choice between following orders and walking away. So I walked." Siora understood that choice better than he could know. She had never been given the option to walk away from anything. "I need to get you to a doctor," Taiho continued, returning to his work. "Your body has been modified in ways I cannot fix with a basic medical kit, and you need proper care. No doctor will help Illumineth," Siora said flatly. "We are too valuable and too dangerous. I know someone who will help," Taiho assured her. "An old friend who operates a clinic in the fringe sectors for people the rest of the galaxy has abandoned." He helped her move to a more comfortable position and brought her water and a simple meal that her stomach could barely tolerate after years of being fed through tubes as she ate. She told him fragments of her story in a voice that grew steadier with each word. Her colony had been a small settlement on a moon that the syndicate raided when she was 8 years old. She remembered her parents screaming, and then she remembered nothing but machines and pain and the endless drain of her own light being stolen. She did not know how many years had passed or how many ships she had powered. She only knew that she had stopped hoping for rescue long ago. Taiho listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he stood and moved to the cockpit to check their status. The syndicate ships had given up their search and moved on, probably to report the theft of their property to higher authorities. "I contacted my friend," he said when he returned. "Counselor Havoc is a Rathani doctor who has helped people like you before, and he is willing to take us in." "What is the cost?" Siora asked, because nothing in the galaxy came without a price. "There is no cost," Taiho answered. "Havoc does not believe in charging people for basic decency." Siora shook her head slowly. "The syndicate will not stop hunting me," she warned. "They have invested too much in my modifications to let me go, and they will kill anyone who helps me. Then they will have to go through me first." She looked at him with something approaching wonder. "You would die for someone you do not even know. I would rather not die at all," Taiho admitted with a slight smile. "But yes, if that is what it takes to keep you safe, then yes." He returned to the pilot's seat and set a course for the fringe sectors where Havoc's clinic waited. The journey would take 3 days. 3 days. During which Siora slowly began to believe that maybe the stories about humans were not exaggerations after all. She learned that Taiho had grown up in a city called Bizen on the Korean peninsula, that he missed the smell of the ocean, that he had left behind his sister who still sent him messages he rarely answered. She learned that he salvaged wrecks, not because he enjoyed it, but because it let him help people without being part of any system. And she learned that when humans decided someone was worth protecting, they did not easily change their minds on the second night. As the ship hummed through hyperspace, Siora asked him the question that had been burning in her mind since he had cut her free. "How did you know I was worth saving?" She whispered, "What?" "If I had been a monster." Taiho looked at her with those strange human eyes that seemed to see past her fear and her pain to something underneath. "Everyone is worth saving until they prove otherwise," he said. "And you have not proven otherwise." Siora felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid for years. She did not cry because she had forgotten how, but she came close on the third day. They arrived at Havoc's station. The syndicate ships were already waiting for them. The ship floated dead in space like a forgotten corpse, its metal hull scarred by asteroid impacts and years of neglect. Yun Taiho guided his salvage vessel closer, scanning the wreckage with tired eyes that had seen too many derelict ships to count. The Valkyrie merchant vessel had been drifting in neutral space for weeks, according to his sensors. And neutral space meant fair game for salvagers like him. He needed this score badly because his fuel reserves were running low and his credits were even lower. Taiho docked his small ship against the merchant vessel's emergency airlock and pulled on his worn environment suit. He grabbed his cutting torch and a plasma pistol, though he expected to find nothing but scrap metal and maybe some outdated technology worth a few credits. On the black market, the airlock hissed open and he stepped into darkness. His helmet light cut through the shadows, revealing a corridor covered in dust and strange organic residue. The ship smelled wrong, even through his suit's filters, carrying a sour stench that reminded him of hospitals and fear. He had served in Earth's military forces for 12 years before walking away from that life, and those years had taught him to trust his instincts. Something about this ship made his instincts scream. He moved deeper into the vessel, checking compartments one by one and finding nothing but empty cargo holds and abandoned crew quarters. The Valkyrie who had crewed this ship had left in a hurry, leaving behind personal belongings and half-eaten meals that had long since rotted away. Taiho wondered what had scared them enough to abandon their own vessel. The answer waited for him in the engine room. He cut through the sealed door with his torch, expecting to find damaged machinery or perhaps a radiation leak that had driven the crew away. Instead, he found her. A girl lay suspended in the center of the room, her small body wrapped in cables and tubes that connected her to the ship's power core. She was not human. That much was clear from her pale blue skin and the delicate ridges that ran along her temples. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was so shallow that at first Taiho thought she was dead. Then he saw the faint glow beneath her skin, a soft light that pulsed weakly like a dying star. He had heard stories about beings like her during his military days, whispered tales about a species called the Lumineth, whose bodies naturally generated massive amounts of bioelectric energy. The stories said they were hunted across the galaxy, captured and used as living batteries to power ships and stations and weapons. Taiho had always hoped those stories were exaggerations meant to frighten new recruits. Looking at this girl, he knew they were true. She could not have been more than 16 years old by human standards. Though alien ages were always difficult to judge, her arms were thin like sticks and her cheeks were hollow from years of having her life Force drained away. The machines attached to her body hummed with stolen energy, feeding her power into the ship's systems while giving nothing back. Taiho felt something twist in his chest. An old feeling he had tried to bury when he left the military. He approached carefully and examined the cables connecting her to the power core. The technology was sophisticated and cruel, designed to maximize energy extraction while keeping the subject alive for as long as possible. Removing her would require cutting through systems that had become integrated with her body. It would hurt her, and it might even kill her. Leaving her would be safer for both of them, because whoever owned this ship would eventually return for their property. Taiho knew the smart thing to do was walk away and pretend he had never seen this room. He reached for his cutting torch instead. "I am going to get you out of here," he said quietly, not knowing if she could hear him. "This might hurt, and I am sorry for that, but I am not leaving you behind." He worked carefully, severing cables one by one while monitoring her vital signs through his suit's medical scanner. Each cut made her flinch, and twice she cried out in a language he did not understand. The glow beneath her skin flickered and dimmed with each disconnection, her body struggling to adjust to freedom after years of captivity. It took him nearly an hour to free her completely. When the last cable fell away, she collapsed into his arms like a broken doll, weighing almost nothing despite her height. Her eyes opened briefly, revealing irises that glowed like captured starlight, and she looked at him with confusion and something that might have been hope. "Human," she whispered in accented but understandable Galactic common. "Why?" "Because someone had to," Taiho answered, lifting her gently. "Can you tell me your name?" "Siora," she said before her eyes closed again, and she went limp in his arms. Taiho carried her through the dark corridors of the merchant vessel, moving as quickly as he dared without jostling her too much. His mind raced with calculations about fuel and distance and the nearest safe port where he could find medical help for her. He was so focused on planning that he almost missed the warning from his suit's sensors. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace, less than 50 kilometers away. He ran. Siora bounced against his chest as he sprinted through the airlock and into his own vessel, barely stopping to seal the door behind him. He placed her on the medical cot in his small cargo bay and threw himself into the pilot's seat. The sensor display showed the 3 ships approaching fast, their signatures matching Syndicate patrol vessels. The Keth Syndicate controlled most of the illegal slave trade in this sector, and they had clearly marked their property with a silent alarm that Taiho had triggered when he cut the girl free. His salvage ship was old and slow compared to Syndicate patrol vessels, but Taiho had spent years modifying its engines for exactly this kind of situation. He pushed the throttle forward and felt the ship lurch as it accelerated toward the nearby asteroid belt. The comm system crackled with an incoming transmission that he ignored. He already knew what they would say, because slavers always said the same things about property and consequences and painful death. The asteroids loomed ahead, a chaotic maze of spinning rock that would tear an inexperienced pilot apart. Taiho smiled grimly and dove straight in behind him. The Syndicate ships followed in the cargo bay. Siora opened her eyes and saw the metal ceiling of an unfamiliar ship shaking with the violence of evasive maneuvers. She did not know where she was or who had taken her or what would happen next. But for the first time in years, the machines were not draining her and the constant pain had faded to a dull ache. She was still afraid, but underneath that fear, she felt something new. A human had found her in the darkness, and instead of using her like everyone else, he had set her free. She did not understand why he had done it, but as the ship shuddered around her and she heard him shouting commands to his vessel's computer, she found herself hoping they would survive long enough for her to ask him